Is on. I'm so excited to introduce you to Ian Mitchell. Again, for those just joining late, I I was diagnosed with cancer as a 37-year-old, super healthy, at least I thought, super healthy person. Um, and this has catapulted my hunger for just the desire to really learn what's out there. And I'll tell you what, I'll just be real. I'll tell you what catapulted it is I thought I was just going to go get the surgery that they're telling me to get. And then I looked into that surgery, and this surgery is gnarly. It is so gnarly. And they told me there's a chance I would never speak again. There's a chance that I would never be able to swallow on my own again. I would be never the same. They said, you'll never be the same. And if you are the same, it'll be like 6 months, and it's just going to be incredibly painful. Just the biopsy of what they were seeing of the tumor, if it was cancerous, was so painful. I couldn't it's in my mouth, and I physically couldn't eat for like 2 weeks, and that's just the biopsy. I'm like, oh no. So I've been properly motivated to find new ways to heal. and and the funny thing is, 3 years ago, God told me to build something on the island that I'm going to be telling you guys about more later. And this has been like a major source of hope and faith for me. But I was walking on the island 3 years ago, and God said to build heal. And I was like, heal? What is heal? And he told me it's a new way. It will share with people a new way to live. And it will also give people who have cancer different opportunities for options for healing. And he said it better than that, obviously. But I was like, oh, okay. I think that is because my best friend Mike died of cancer at like 40 years old, left behind a baby and a brand new wife. And it's just a horrible, sad story. And we miss him every day. Um, so I thought it would be to honor him. And then now, with the specific type of cancer I was diagnosed with, I'm not going to like die in 6 months or something crazy like that, but their prognosis is like, even if you beat it, it'll come back forever. And I am going to say, no, you don't get to tell me how short my life is going to be. It's my first time talking about it publicly, actually. You don't get to cut my time with my baby short, and you're not going to cut the good work that we're doing short. There's too many other ways, and they even said with the surgery, it doesn't like really lengthen that much time, so screw that. Um, I trust God that everything that comes against me, He can work out for good, and I've committed to that. And I'm so grateful to be introducing you guys to Ian, because we had a board member named Brett Harmeling introduce me to him. Like, he was one of the first people I told, because we told our board, and he connected me, and Ian was so kind. Just spent like so much time walking me through it. I know he gets a million calls a day, but he talked to me, and he cared, and he shared with me these new non-invasive ways to heal yourself. And I've begun doing that, and the pain in my face has gone down by 90% already. It's only been like 6 weeks, and I don't even think I've done it right the whole 6 weeks, but it's working. I'm gonna get a scan soon to really see how much the tumor has shrank, and in the name of Jesus, it will be gone. Um, but I just feel this amazing burden to share with people, because when I went through MD Anderson, which is one of the top cancer places in the world for surgery, radiation, chemo, they really are high level experts in that. It was one of the most sad things I've ever seen. And it was sad because the cafeteria is full of candy and junk food and processed stuff and pizza, and they're giving that to these cancer patients between their radiation treatments. The common sense elements were missing. And I was so sad that people think this is the only way. And I saw babies in there, I saw elderly people in there, and it's just the sadness of the sickness. And so, again, I'm really pumped to introduce y'all to him. He is whose protocols I'm following. I think he's just an amazing force for good person. Uh, I'm gonna have to calm him down on all the big words he uses because he's brilliant. And I really want you guys to understand this, but Ian Mitchell is the founder of Wizard Sciences. He's this, I'm gonna have to read this because it's again still big words for me to even read what he's associated with. But scientific advisor to Satori Neuro, the polymath in residence at Austin-based investment firm Space Cowboy Ventures, the chief scientific advisor for Lila Quantum, and CSO at Redbud Brands. He's currently nominated to be the director of the National Cancer Institute. He's been tapped by RFK. He holds multiple patents and joint patents in nanomedicine, materials science, biochemistry, viral inhibitors, cancer screening technology, and personalized cell culture media. And then, if that wasn't enough, he also recently developed the first viable gamma ray shielding system for use on spacecraft and space habitats, as well as carbon negative concrete to inhibit greenhouse gas proliferation, and multiple patents in the CBG space. Um, he's brilliant. So, with that, I introduce Ian Mitchell. Ian, welcome to the stage.
Howdy. Thanks, Brittany. That was, it's kind of funny when you hear something like that. It sounds. Had I not been there for all of those things, and when you condense it into 20 seconds, it sounds like a lot. But I promise, it's over the past decade, it seemed like it was a lot slower progression. But yeah, I'm super happy to be here, and that was beautiful. What you said was very beautiful. And again, actually, I was going to say, case in point for you, post biopsy, you were told that the wound from the biopsy would what?
Never heal.
Right. Yeah, would never heal.
Never
And
heal because it's cancer.
right. And what's it doing now?
It's healed, guys. The wound, it's healed. It literally has been bleeding for 6 weeks and it has stopped. And not only stopped, but like I said, the pain has gone down so much. And so must be healing. We're believing.
Yeah, so the crux of this is, there was a day before penicillin, there was a day after penicillin. Technology changes. And the big impediment to change is not necessarily not being able to find the information. It's in a lot of cases, probably more often than not, thinking that you already possess the information and being okay with it. So personally, the reason, my kind of cancer journey got kicked off was when I was a kid. I watched my grandfather die of prostate cancer, and it sucked. It was absolutely abysmal, and it metastasized to his bones, and there was not a damn thing I could do about it other than watch him suffer and die. And so once I had the wherewithal, and I had the kind of the acumen in terms of just the requisite skill for biochem, I was sort of gifted, if you will, with the insights on how to do it. And so I simply synthesized the compounds that are necessary to stop it. And it's not actually, honestly, it's not that tricky. You have to take into account what's going on and focus on it. But the most important thing to realize is that fundamentally your body is brilliant. It's, in my opinion, divinely inspired and absolute genius. And anybody who works on physical systems on the daily and quite literally isn't in awe every day has lost the plot. because because if you look at a body and you're not just dumbfounded by the innate beauty and complexity of the thing, you're missing the point. And so with that is kind of part of the mindset, the idea that your body has what it needs to heal and fundamentally wants to be in a balance, kind of find a point of homeostasis where it's in balance, it's harmonious, it's moving forward, it's, anabolic, progressing in growth as opposed to catabolic and decreasing in growth. You want to be life giving and life promoting and not life consuming. To that end, the therapeutic specifically that I developed is basically it's a combination of nanoparticles and lipids with a couple of other things that inhibit cancer in the body by virtue of literally getting the cancer to kill itself. And it sounds kind of funny, but cancer cells the reason they're cancerous is they have a couple of very specific hallmarks. And one of those is, an uninhibited growth profile. So your normal cells, when they replicate, they know where to stop. Your kidney doesn't continue to grow into your liver, and your liver doesn't continue to grow into your gallbladder. Like everything knows where it's supposed to be. Cancer cells are a little different in that they lack contact inhibition. So they don't stop when that particular organ or tissue system stops. And if they can't replicate like a normal cell, I would assume a lot of you guys, given that everybody's kind of in the health space, and a lot of you are, taking good care of yourself, you've all heard of the term senescent cells, right? A senescent cell is a zombie cell, and that's kind of the common parlance for it. And basically, what that means is it's a cell that is damaged, but it doesn't replicate. So, in a lot of cases, those are sort of the precursors that you see very often. They're one of the hallmarks that you see a lot of in aggregate before people start having cancer. And it's because they're breaking down in terms of their capacity to genetically replicate with high fidelity. So your cells get weaker and weaker and weaker over time. Kind of like running a photocopy of a photocopy of a photocopy of a photocopy. Everything breaks down. And so with cancer cells, if they cannot replicate, they don't do what a normal cell that's broken does. When it can't replicate, it just becomes senescent and floats around your system, kind of mucks up the gearworks a little bit, but it just stays there.
Hmm.
Cancer cells, if they're not able to replicate, they literally blow themselves apart and then just depend on the nutrients that are, extracted from that to help promote the other cancer cells to continue cycling. And they'll typically cycle in about a 24-hour period. Their primary sugar, or their primary fuel is sugars, right? And so if any of you guys have ever seen a PET scan registers a thing called the standard uptake value. And that's basically how glycolytically active, which is just the fancy science way of saying how much sugar does the thing suck up. And so what you're looking for are the hot spots that show up on the imagery. And you do that by using a combination of a floral molecule, 18F, and then a deoxyglucose, which is the sugar. But it's a special type of sugar that's not metabolizable. So I took basically the same premise and came up with a nanoparticle that would inhibit the replication of the cancer cells and bound it to something that mimics a sugar particle. It's actually a process called catalysis. And so it's catalyzed with this special type of sugar. And so the cancer thinks it's pulling in a sugar and it pulls this stuff in. And much like putting a wrench in a gear, it actually wedges itself in magnetically into the minor groove of the DNA and inhibits transcription. And when you inhibit transcription in a cancer cell, it kills itself.
Hmm.
And if you inhibit transcription in enough cancer cells, you kill all the cancer. And it's a process. Yeah, exactly. And that's what we're shooting for here,
I
is
love
to
it.
send all of the cells.
Well,
So
before we go into too much of that, I don't want to interrupt you because I know you're an
yeah,
amazing.
no, ask
Um,
away.
we have a lot of people in here, and I just want to premise this, guys. We've asked a lot of questions. We're going to totally get to those. But I love that he's breaking down like why does it happen in the first place? And that's specifically cancer. He deals with more than just cancer, which is amazing. But it's understanding the why, and even as entrepreneurs, because almost there's so many people on here as entrepreneurs, we look at like why are things happening in the first place versus like just deal with the issue. Well, why is the issue manifesting at all? And so he's breaking it down to the science of the pieces to inhibit it from happening in the first place. And that PET scan was so interesting. They basically inject radioactive sugar in you and it finds the cancer pieces and goes, oh, I'll feed you now. So it's lighting up the screen because the cancer is eating that sugar, which is a huge wake up call because I love cookies. Dang it. I love those plain macadamia nut cookies. And I found a way to make protein versions and like I love cookies. And so what is it that needs to be dropped if you're trying to heal yourself? But I want to get into all this. I don't want to interrupt you, but I do want to go into maybe if you want to wrap up that point, what does it really take in the mindset? Because I know you've worked with, I don't even know, thousands of people at this point that have come to you and said, I'm struggling with X illness. What is the mindset that helps people to actually heal in the first place? What does it take for survivors versus those that end up dying? What have you seen as the common denominators in that?
Hope. Hope is the common denominator. And not to sound, like a platitude, but that's genuinely it. If you
Scientific answer, hope.
Yeah, fundamentally and not just with cancer, but pretty much with any pathology that I, help people with, that's kind of the common thread is if people think they're hosed and they're doomed and it's, all is lost and it's all for naught, well, you're going to believe yourself at some level. You kind of you become what you think, and if you think you're on your way out and you're going to die, uh, your body changes and adapts. It's one of those things that people don't really realize it, but it has a profound impact on just your endocrine system. If you look at tears, right? So not everybody has the capacity to do this. I do because I have a lab. But if you look at tears, like if you smack your finger and it literally produces a tear from the pain, and you run a spec analysis on that, the chemical composition is different than if it's tears because you're sad and if it's tears because you're happy. So even though it looks the same fundamentally from the outside, it's very different internally, and your body adapts and reflects a lot of what your mind is doing. So pain, happiness, heartache, whatever it is, it's a
What a line. Your body reflects a lot of what your mind is doing.
yeah. Well, one of the fundamental things, and this gets into a little bit of a different tangent that I'm sure we can cover, and it's great if this is more of a dialogue. I love the idea of kind of talking to people. The quantum biological aspect of things, right? Because I look at a lot of things from a biochemical perspective, but the reality is when you really start to break it down, if you want to understand the best ways to heal people and help things, you really have to look at what's the root cause, right? Henry David Thoreau said this thing that I always laugh about. He said, "For every thousand hacking at the branches of evil, there's one hacking at the root." That's
Mhm.
who you want to be, right? Like you want to figure out what the root causation is behind something and address the actual problem, not just beat around palliatively and try and mask the symptoms, which is unfortunate, but that's kind of what in Western medicine what we've done is everybody addresses things palliatively and just tries to make the symptoms go away and take sort of the ostrich approach to medicine, put your head in the sand and go, oh, there is no pain. And that doesn't really work, right? Because, it's still going to creep up and get you. And I think one of the things that's really requisite is you have to address it at that base level. And so for me, when I looked at the biochem, well, then you start looking at the chemistry behind the biochemistry. And when you start looking at the chemistry, you start looking at the physics. And then when you start looking at the physics, you start to look at the quantum physics behind it. And at this point, really, most of what I have realized is that we're all functioning on all of these different levels. But if I want to knock something out, the most effective way to do that is to go as far down the chain as I can and hit it as close to the root as I can. And so
Nice.
that applies to, going after the genetic transcription inside of cancer cells. It applies to going down to the mitochondrial level in most cells because cancer, like most conditions, are not actually sort of genetic problems. Like, people are always told cancer is a genetic disease. That's not
Yeah.
the case.
That was the first thing they said to me. This top surgeon was just doing a biopsy. And I said, I just heard that when you cut into a tumor, doesn't it like then spread all over your body? And he said, maybe. I was like, well, I'm trying
Yeah.
to cut back. And he said, well, there's no other way to get into it. And I said, was it 5 hour energy that caused this? Was it stress that caused it? What caused this? Did I eat something wrong? Was it the cookies? And he said, it's genetic. 100% it's genetic. This is such a rare form. There's nothing you did that caused it. And I'm like, well, then if I didn't cause it, I can't correct it. And so as a radical ownership person, I didn't like the genetic thing, especially when nobody in my family has this genetic that we know of. So,
Yeah, well, and that's exactly it, Brittany. That's if you want to take people's power away, tell them that it's something outside of their control, right? In my estimation, and Tom Seyfried at Boston College and Naisha Winters, who trains, literally, she's trained about 1,000 oncologists. All of us are beating the drum, saying, "Oh, hey, turns out it's a metabolic disorder, so there's hope, right? We can metabolically take people out of a state of dysregulation, put them back in a normative homeostatic state, and then everybody's good, right? Your body will do what your body does. It doesn't want to be sick. It wants to function. It's kind of like if you broke your wrist, you fell down on your broke wrist and somebody said, well, you took an impact there and you're genetically predisposed to breaking your radius. Oh, okay. Maybe if I had genetically had a stronger radius, it wouldn't have broken. But I have yet to meet a person who does not have some genetic frailty. It's kind of inherent in part of being human, right? Like maybe if you meet somebody and they have a halo and wings and they're glowing and they're floating, maybe that person doesn't have any genetic frailties. But I have yet to have somebody float into the lab or the clinic. Um, you know, at that point, I'll rewrite everything. But for right now, everybody has genetic proclivities and genetic points of weakness. Sometimes they express, in the brain. Sometimes they express in the heart. It's, we're all moving biologically to a point of, you know, decay. And as much as I, am not a huge fan of entropy, that's really what's going on, right? As you age, your body starts to break down. Now, does it need to break down at the same rate? No, it absolutely doesn't. You can be much stronger and healthier. You can be metabolically fit and active, and you can do that literally into your 80s, 90s, hundreds, and beyond. One of the studies that I had done early on was I saw a study out of France by a fellow named Fafi Moussa, and it was kind of a radical study where they were looking for a thing that we call an LD50, which is a lethal dosing study with a new compound, and they used this compound called carbon 60 and they introduced it into these mice to see what would happen. Well, and actually in that case, it was Worcester rats, actually, is what they used. So they introduced it to these Worcester rats, and the mice in the control group died. The mice in the experimental group did not die, and they kept not dying. And on average, they lived 90% longer than they should have lived. And when I saw that study, I thought, bullshit, no way. I thought that was a fallacy, just could not happen. So I thought, you know what? Okay, with deference to these guys, I'll rerun that experiment and see what I can do it with. So I used a thing called P53 knockout mice, which are, if you guys have ever seen kind of pictures of the mice that have the tumors that are just popping up all over their body, those are P53 knockouts, and we use them in oncology because you breed them without a P53, which is your tumor suppressor gene. You breed them without the tumor suppressor gene, and I'd say there probably have been at a minimum hundreds of thousands of these little guys bred and used in oncology research for decades now. And what happens is you, over that amount of time, you end up with very, very, very clearly defined mortality curves, right? So you know when these little guys are going to drop. And in my case, I used a thing called a homozygous, which is a knockout. So they didn't have any tumor suppression. So they should have idiopathically, which is just a spontaneous presentation of tumors, they should have idiopathically presented with tumors very, very quickly. They should have all been dead by 6 months. Well, at the end of the experiment, the average lifespan extension was 93%. So they almost all lived a year. And the
Wow.
crazy bit was they didn't have tumors. And so when the first mouse died, I opened it up and did a thing called a necropsy, and I peeled it back and started going through it, and I found a little bitty maybe tumor, but it was very clear that it had died of a femoral hemorrhage. And I thought, well, I'm not a veterinary pathologist. What the hell do I know? The next time one of these things dies, I'll send it off and have it done by somebody who's a pro at this. So the next time a mouse keeled over, I put them on ice, shipped them overnight to a vet pathologist to do a full histological workup, look at everything, slice the tissues, go through everything, and tell me what the tissues were and how the cells looked. And sure enough, no cancer. And I thought, okay, well, that's odd. And then it happened again and again and again. So at the end of the day, these guys did not get cancer and they didn't have tumors. And then they lived on average 93% longer than they were supposed to. And I thought, that's completely bizarrely anomalous. That's not what I was expecting. So then I started kind of pulling the string and running down the rabbit hole of like, how the hell does this work? What is happening? And so that's when I really ended up realizing that it was a metabolic shift. And what I was doing is I was modulating the mitochondrial health. And when I modulated the mitochondrial health, everything functioned well, and they were all super strong.
What does mitochondrial health mean to new people?
Okay, so inside your, like from eighth grade biology or whatever, you probably have always heard, mitochondria are the powerhouse of the cell, right? And so the idea for mitochondrial health, your cells should have a certain amount of energy, right? -70 to -90 millivolts per cell. And so your mitochondria have this kind of cellular energy. They pump out a thing called ATP, adenosine triphosphate. And everybody typically thinks of that as the energy currency of the cell. I actually think that's wrong and a fallacy. I think ATP is a phosphorylated storage system for energy production that's actually happening in quantum fluctuations in
And
water.
you're gonna lose this. You're gonna lose this.
Okay, but so yeah, I won't get down the rabbit hole, but suffice it to say, nature is pretty sharp, and human hubris is kind of unparalleled. And if you look at the electron transport chain, at the very end of the whole cycle for energy production, you have ATP and then you have water. And if you give something infinite intelligence in billions of years, it's probably going to figure out how to make the reaction happen so that it ends up with what it's shooting for. So
Yeah.
I would posit that at the end of the reaction, what you want is water. And the water that comes out of your mitochondria is what actually is used in your body. So you're not actually utilizing the water that you drink. The water that you drink is broken down and processed through your mitochondria, and then you utilize the water that comes out as a byproduct from your mitochondria. So that would tell you, just for those of us playing along in the home version of the game, there's probably something special to it. And I would say that that water in the particular structure that it's set up in is able to process quantum flux. Think of it kind of like as wireless charging system, right? It's more like a wireless charging. The ATP is necessary because it's a battery that stores the energy. It'd be kind of the same mistake between confusing the battery on your cell phone with power, right? Everybody just assumes that it's power because we think we understand water, but I would posit that we really don't have much of a grasp of water. For anybody who really wants to drill down, great book on that called The Fourth Phase of Water by a professor named Gerald Pollack at the University of Washington. Really good book. When I taught senior biochem, it was one of the only two books on my required reading list because it very clearly elucidates that none of us really understand what we think of as water, and there's a whole lot more going on, which is kind of the same thing that happens across the board.
You said something interesting to me earlier. So, guys, I'm trying so hard to like prep with him on this call, but I also like really honor his time and don't want to just keep him on the phone. So I got 1 hour to talk to him, and the whole time I'm just asking him personal, selfish questions. Well, we got through it, and we are here. But you said something earlier that was so interesting. You said sometimes I'm gonna mess it up, so correct me. Sometimes people's entire health changes if you just change the water they drink.
Yeah,
Like,
and that's
oh,
very true.
there's some special cool water. You just had one in your hand, and then there's
Oh,
you listed.
yeah.
We'll
So
talk
this
about it a
is
little bit later, but
this is called Inhale. It's a water that I made, and the idea there was, if you're looking at cancer, one of the other things is cancer is an anaerobic disease, right? So it functions without the presence of oxygen, and it replicates more effectively without oxygen. It derives its energy through basically like fermentation. It's called the Warburg effect. And if you want to really inhibit cancer, one of the things that's a great frontline therapy is hyperbaric. You put somebody in a hyperbaric chamber, you increase their static loading of oxygen, and it slows down the proliferative rates of the cancer. But it's a real bitch to get people to be able to go into a hyperbaric chamber 7 days a week, and it's also a lot of money to get them to do
expensive.
that
Yeah, it's
if
expensive.
people even have access to it. So I kind of reframed it and figured rather than put them in a can, I'll put the can in them. So water normally has 5 to 8 parts per million oxygen, and that really does nothing. It's just normal water. But I figured out a way to get this up to 180 parts
Right.
per million when it's canned. And so when you crack it open, it's at about 100 parts per million. And we just finished the first big clinical trial on it about 3 or 4 months ago. And so it, completely showed beyond statistical significance that it increases your blood oxygen saturation, decreases your cardiac loading, and on the note of cancer, which wasn't part of that, but I can tell you just by proxy, if you increase the oxygen rate, you decrease the proliferative rates of cancer. So uh,
How
I
long do I
sucked
have
this.
to chug it though? I'm not a good chugger. Jeremy can chug things so fast, but how long do I have to drink it before all the oxygen's out?
Well, usually, if you can do it in a couple minutes, you're fine. It's going to
Oh,
stay above 57 parts per million at an hour.
okay.
Um, but the biggest thing is if you can just crack the can. Now, the reason I do it, I don't have cancer, but I do use my brain all day, every day. That's kind of what I get paid to do, and it's also fun. Even if I don't get paid, I still am a big fan of using my brain. So your brain weighs about 2% of your body mass, but it sucks down 20 to 25% of all of your available oxygen. So if you can figure out a way to get a tremendous amount of oxygen back in your system, then you're going to have more capacity neurally. And so, since I'm kind of a guppy where I use all of my brain as much as I can every day and literally do puzzles and cognitive work every single day to just keep honing the edge. This is great stuff, but that's what that is. The other type of water that's really great is deuterium depleted water, and molecular hydrogen water. So molecular hydrogen, I'm sure all of you guys have heard about. Deuterium depleted water, there's, I don't know, about 1,000 plus studies on the benefits of deuterium depleted water for cancer.
I didn't take
And
the class. How do we spell it?
Deuterium, deuterium.
Okay.
Yeah,
Is there a
deuterium
specific
depleted
brand
water.
you recommend too for that?
Actually, light water is probably the best bet, but the problem there is, and the reason I don't recommend it to people is it's stupidly expensive. So a month-long supply is going to cost you ballpark about $600.
Ooh.
Um, yeah, it's kind of ridiculous. And the rationale for that is the technique that's used to make it is the same technique that was developed by the Germans during World War II to make heavy water for atomic bombs, and nobody else has made a different method. I actually did, and I'm going to put some out at the same
Nice.
cost of normal water here shortly. Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, it's I'm sure it's going to annoy a bunch of the people in the deuterium depleted water space because it actually doesn't cost that much to do it if you know what you're doing. It's just nobody had innovated it since 1938.
Nice.
So yeah, wait, honestly, that happens a lot in the medical framework and the technological framework. Anyway,
Oh, okay.
digression.
No,
Let's
because of digression, I actually want to go back like 4 slides. I just want to
yeah.
go through like what does healing yourself really mean? Again, you've seen it. We've talked about this. I took some notes here, but I want you to explain this, and then we're going to go into the cool scientific breakthroughs that you're seeing. But start here. What does it really take to heal yourself?
Aha. Okay, so to heal yourself, that means you put yourself back in your natural balance, and your body is trying to always run in a good balance where it's not impinged and damaged. And to heal just means to get back to that point, whatever that point means for you. Like if you take, some of the guys that show up at the clinic are professional athletes and they're doing just insane stuff. There's a guy here named Blaine McConnell who's this ridiculous athlete. Healing for him means getting back to the point where you can run a 40-yard dash in 4.15 seconds, right? For me, healing would be probably running that in double that time, you know? um, so it's just whatever your body is, wherever it's in balance, and that's it. It's very simple. Just give yourself the tools to get back to a point where you're not impinged biologically and you're able to do the things that you want to do.
Okay. Well, that was interesting because that guy's on my calls with him. I'm saying, okay, what do I do in the physical? And then we actually had the conversation like, what do I have to do in like the spiritual? What do I have to do in my mind, body, spirit? Because this really is, I think, to overcome something as big as cancer, there's the mind, body, spirit element and the science element now. If it's gotten that out of alignment somehow, then there's that. And I told him like there's some weird people out there. I've figured out why people are not public about their journey while they're going through it, but whatever. I feel like this will help people. It'll help enough people that I've decided I'm going to share as I go. But some people are like your grandmother's. It's in your mouth because your grandmother didn't speak her truth on the seventh day of the. I'm like, what the frick are you talking about? So, at what point is the yeah? People have said so many weird and rude things. I'll teach you guys a class. What not to say to someone that's dealing with this at some point. First, let me just quick one point. When you find out someone has cancer, don't let your opening 2 sentences be, I'm sorry you have cancer. Everyone I know that's ever had cancer has died. Like, don't say that. My uncle just died. Just don't say it. Just be like, I'm praying for you. Actually, not death to
You know,
what they're telling you. But
I
anyway, where's the mind, body, spirit element in your opinion?
so actually, and this sounds kind of odd coming from a scientist, but what I would say is your physical form is an expression of your consciousness, right? And that sounds again somewhat odd for a scientist to say, but when I look at everything and start really breaking it down, people think of their body as being a solid, real thing. In reality, when you push on something, you're not actually pushing on something, you're just feeling electron cloud repulsion, right? And that's at a subatomic level. Your negative charge is pushing against the negative charge of something else. You're this very beautifully coalesced form that's crafted out of all of these vibrating little bits of things. And I would actually put out the idea that your consciousness holds together your physical form and whatever means is necessary for you to move through life and experience what you're supposed to experience so that you can grow and evolve. Which, again, admittedly, that sounds like a very, kind of woo woo sort of approach, but the data is the data, right? And I've done a lot of experiments in quantum biology where we have seen things that nobody would expect to see in a lab. We took cell cultures, literally just cell plates, and did randomized double-blind, trials where we were able to, at a distance of 307,000 miles, respectively, bump up the ATP output, which we can measure pretty easily, between 20 and 29% instantaneously. Right, cells that are being modulated by things at a distance of 7,000 miles without any lag time at all, right?
What?
And it's because, in my estimation, much like the 2022 Nobel Prize was awarded for, kind of pointing out that quantum entanglement is very real and it actually happens, and it's, in, as best we can tell, an instantaneous function. I would actually think that, much more than people would like to believe, everyone and everything is connected,
Oh,
and the quantum field that kind of underpins everything, is in fact inherently intelligent.
does this
And
mean
after,
dolls work?
what's that?
Does this mean voodoo dolls work? Nobody's got mine.
I,
And I
you know, I mean, energy is an interesting thing, and the reality is, if you point positive intent at things, they benefit. If you
yeah.
point negative intent at things, they move towards the detriment. It's, I mean, and everybody's had that experience. If you walk into a room and somebody is absolutely angry, you can feel it, right? You don't have to, it's not necessarily that you have to be close enough to pick up a pheromone. You can literally feel
Oh
the
yeah.
energetics. And you can even image, there's a large toroidal magnetic field around your heart that literally is off kilter 8 degrees to the left coming out of your heart, and it expands all the way around your body. Those are things that we can image. So the idea that you're just a physical being, in the sense of a meat suit, kind of silly. At this point, we know enough to know that your body communicates with little femtosecond bursts of light in the mitochondria. That's how they communicate. They are effectively fiber optic, if you will. You've got literally trillions of these little guys zapping around energy in the form of light at the speed of light, communicating to run the whole system. And
I
so for
love
the
how science catches up to things that were described as woo woo at some point.
Yeah, well, and when you're working on quantum biology, a lot of what you hit is literally woo woo. Everything, because you're right at the forefront of things, and there are not yet terminologies that are kind of agreed upon, right? That's the issue, is there's no parlance that really covers all this stuff, because we haven't really nailed it down in terms of the science. And honestly, at this point, science may as well be the religion of the modern age. 2000 years ago, if we were having a similar conversation, you'd probably say, well, the vase fell down off the ledge because Zeus wanted it so. And now you'd go, well, fell down because there was a shock and that twisted the angular momentum of this and it processed in this direction. It's just an expression. Either way, the thing fell, right? And physiologically, I think we obviously relate to one another in a physical sense, but my experience is that there's a whole lot more going on, and we are much more a thought than we are a thing. And I would
Oh,
say that the data
cool.
is very much in on that.
And
Um,
the rabbit hole. I love it. I love
Yeah,
it.
and it's if you look at the physics of it, it's really not much of a rabbit hole. The average person won't have the capacity or the time or the interest to really look at it and see how that breaks down. But if you do, there are plenty of scientific resources out there where you can go out and you'll see that at this point your thoughts definitively impact your biology. And I mean, much like your biology can impact your thoughts. If somebody drives a nail through the end of your finger on accident, you're going to have your thoughts impacted.
Yeah.
Um, but it's kind of like a seesaw. You can push down on one side and raise the other, or you can push down on the other side and raise the other. They're implicitly linked. They're intrinsically connected.
It's so much, guys. I mean, all of the books and the scripture that says, "So as a man thinketh, so is he," and so it's going from woo and stupid to realizing just the power of your thoughts. How do we start being intentional versus just flopping around like a dying fish in life? Being intentional, being clear, being direct, and so we can move faster. So I love that. And that's one of the reasons I wanted him on this call tonight, guys. Is there's he's gonna say some fancy words and he might lose a few of you. Stay with us because I want him to create that hope. Because when I heard the surgery that I had to have and how long they told me I'd even live after that, all effed up. Sorry, I have to say it. I needed hope. And what we're going to talk about now is just to plant some seeds in your mind on what's possible. What are these breakthroughs that you're seeing, Ian, with the work you're doing, what you're seeing at these conferences? Where do you see these innovations going over the next 5 to 10 years? Then we're going to start getting into these questions because we know y'all are dying to ask them.
Yeah, no, and I'm here for the questions. So there's so much innovation, and obviously one of the big ones that everybody jumps to right now is AI, and I love AI because humans really suck at multivariate systems analysis. Like if you're juggling 15 things and somebody says track two of them, people are not really good at that. Machine learning, great at that. AI algorithms, great at that, and it's really changing kind of the field of medicine because you can assess how people function and it can suss out details that other people wouldn't catch because it has access to literally tens of millions of data points and can crunch tens of millions of data points. It's not going to hold your hand and comfort you, but as a diagnostic tool, it's at this point almost damn near unparalleled because it can just process so much data. So I think if we use all the new tools like that in combination with all of the things that we already have, we're going to move things forward more in the next few years than have happened in the past 100 years. And I think that's
Yeah.
definitely coming. Well, some of the things that I've seen recently that are just kind of mind-boggling to me are quantum diagnostics, and that's like Star Trek technology, where people are diagnosing conditions by quantumly interfacing with another person at another point. They're not having to put their finger on them and palpate. They're not having to do that. They literally link to them from somewhere else remotely, and maybe have a device like a biophotonic device to get an impact from some particular point, and that's remarkable. Like that is the future of this, right? When you can see and kind of look with such granularity that you can drill down and look at that kind of stuff, it excites the hell out of me because like that's where it should be. The Star Trek med bed where you go in and it scans you and says, "Oh, hey, your liver's like this." And then the next step of that is once you're able to diagnose things like that, simply looking at it and saying, "Okay, how do you fix that?" And one of the experiments, there's a video of me online at a conference a few years back um, with a company that I advise called Lila Quantum. And Lila Quantum works on quantum technologies, remote healing, kind of stuff like that. And the CEO of that company asked me, he had this thing when they first started called a quantum block. And it looks like a block. There's no electricity or magnetism or anything, but it creates, the way they've kind of set everything up, it creates a point of high quantum flux, which again, there are not many agreed on terms here, but for all intents and purposes, you could say it's kind of like a super high point of energetics. And so I brought a guy on stage who had anaphylaxis to shellfish, right? And what I did is I took a can of crab meat and I cracked open the can of crab meat and I put a thing called a derma roller in it. And a derma roller, for those of you who don't know, it's a little wheel with lots of little bitty needles on the surface. And this was just, point zero point 0.5 millimeters, so very, very tiny little needles. And I put it in the crab juice and then I rolled it right up his arm. And instantly, hives, red mark, weep, because he had really bad anaphylaxis for it. So super pronounced histamine reaction right in the arm, and you could see the welts. Then I put the can of crab meat in this quantum block and lectured about waveforms. And that's kind of where I was headed with this is your body is this collection of waveforms. Some things are disharmonious, they clash. And when that happens, that clash decreases the amount of energy output. Some things are harmonious. When that happens, it increases the amplitude in the system and you have more energy. So, with the case of this, after I kind of lectured about how waveforms are actually functioning and constructive interference helps you, destructive interference is perceived as harming you. Histamine reactions are that, right? There, when your waveform clashes with something else's waveform, it creates an impedance and it decreases your energy. And that is what we think of as a histamine reaction. But this is actually happening two steps before the biochemistry. It's happening at a quantum level, which would then become a subatomic level, which would then become atomic, and then molecular, and then it would work its way up. And so when you change that, as I did with this, I take the can out of the block, I put a new derma roller in it and roll up his other arm, and nothing happens. And most of the people in the audience were, biohackers or doctors. And literally, the reaction to that when they saw it firsthand was kind of like a dog hearing a new sound, where most of the people in the audience kind of went, bro. And at the end of the lecture, it was kind of funny because literally every single person in the audience came up to look at his arms because it didn't make sense that you can be allergic to something 1 second and not allergic to it the next. And that's because our conception about what is it really that you're having a reaction to, it's not the chemical. A molecule or a chemical is just vibrational information, right? That's why it's contained in that particular configuration, is that's the most effective way to store that bit of information. Nature is nothing if not efficient. And so the vibrational capacity of something to hold that information is what you're really dealing with. And when you figure out how to modulate that, woo, sky's the limit. You can do all sorts of really cool stuff. Like you can take water and lock in frequencies into the water and do different things with it. For anybody who thinks that sounds terribly bizarre, I, just for what it's worth, I did the very first time I heard that too. And I heard it from a fellow who was a Nobel laureate named Luc Montagnier. He won the Nobel Prize for isolating the HIV virus. And I think, save the fact that he was already a Nobel laureate, everybody would have thought that he was a quack. But Luke spent the last 10, 15 years of his life figuring out how to house and store information in water, and he thought that was going to be the future of medicine. And I agree, with the one caveat being, I don't think it's just about water. I think it's just about vibration, right? And I think Tesla actually kind of nailed it. He said, if you want to understand the universe, think in terms of waves, frequency, and vibration. And
Yeah.
that's kind of it. And yeah, and I just saw somebody post that
I
water
heard
has memory.
Water.
It does.
Yeah, doesn't Death Water have like somebody doing witchcraft over it? I heard that.
Yeah, my guess is water is probably smart enough that it kind of goes. So,
Weird though. Careful. Like, is it Liquid Death, right? Liquid
it
Death.
is liquid death. Yeah.
It actually says they've got some witch like doing their things. Anyway, I'm
Yeah, well, this stuff actually is like love in a can, because it's an entirely different thing. Um, that's actually, and that's because I think, and this is just my personal stance on it, after having done a lot of testing and seeing a lot of stuff that will, some of it's already released. Actually, I just saw one of the image from the brain scans we were doing. A lot of the data is out there. Some of it has yet to be published, but yeah, it's love in a can. That's it. That's exactly it.
love and a
I just saw
can.
that pop. Yeah, and that's the intent,
Well,
because,
oh, go ahead. Sorry.
well, no, just you can nourish people's body, but you need to nourish their soul too, and that's it.
We had a chef on the island. He's so cute. We've had several different chefs over our time, and he'd say at the end, he'd always explain the food, and at the end he goes, and we also put in love. And at the end of him like cooking for a week, I said, what do you mean by love? He said, when you make a sandwich for school and it tastes okay, but then when your mom makes a sandwich for school, so much better. She leaves you that little note in there. He goes, that's love. It's when your mom makes that sandwich, you can taste the love. And I was like, so yes, intention matters so much. Rapid fire though, because I know we want to get into these questions.
Ooh, okay.
Got AI is going to change health. I've heard that it's actually even able to rebuild damaged brains. And I work with a lot of people with traumatic brain injuries. So we've got everything from AI being able to diagnose, AI being able to rebuild brain. What other cool things are you seeing Just high level, rapid fire, cutting edge in the breakthroughs in science right now.
So many of the things that people always think of, in terms of like a personal example for me, I was in a really bad motorcycle wreck, and my femur was inside of my tibia. So upper leg bone, the femoral condyle, which is the big curve on the bottom of the bone, punched into the top of the tibial condyle, left a 1 inch crater, wedged itself in, and split my leg 6 inches down like a log. So when I was brought into the ER, I talked to the orthopedic surgeon and said, "All right, how is it?" And he said, "It's kind of bad, man." And I said, "All right, what's the the protocol here?" And he said, "Well, we're going to have to put you under general anesthesia. We're going to cut you from your calf up to your quad, and then we're going to put in pins and plates and screws and bone filler, and put you in traction for 12 weeks. And then when you're done with that, we'll start PT, but you can't have any pressure on your leg for 12 weeks." So I did what any, strange guy who runs a lab would do and said, "That's cool. I got this. I'm just going to check myself out." So I went back and I called my staff and said, go buy a hospital bed. And they did, one of the fancy electric up and down, raising, lowering hospital beds. And then I had them come and pick me up at the hospital. So they drove up and literally wheeled my gurney down to the first floor from my hospital room, and like a wounded dolphin, lifted me on a bed sheet and put me in the back of a pickup truck, drove me to my lab and set me up on a bed in front of my office door. And then we proceeded to take the next few weeks and regenerate my body. And I used pulsed electromagnetic fields, lasers, nanoparticles, and did 7 stem cell procedures over the span of 6 weeks, which admittedly is a bit aggressive. But at the end of 9 weeks, the bone was completely regenerated. I was up and walking. Everything was back in position. No pins, no plates, no screws, anything.
Wow.
And that's the kind of stuff that's possible,
How
and
many weeks?
it's nine, nine
9.
weeks.
Wow.
Yeah. And so that's a firsthand thing. And there are a lot of different technologies like PIMP coils, pulsed electromagnetic fields. Brilliant. It changes the way bones regenerate.
Bioelectromagnetic frequency,
You
right?
can. So usually, if you're there are a couple of different ways you can modulate a wave. And so PIMF is usually just like one wave. They take the intensity and they take the pulse rate, and that's it. And they usually come out at a standard amplitude. You can actually modulate all that stuff. I mean, if you wanted to, you could actually play music over a PIMF coil. You can embed frequencies in anything. Not really necessary, but it's brilliant for healing, right? So that kind of stuff stimulates things. There's a ton of things with photonics. Because we did this a week ago at the clinic in Miami. So I have a stem cell procedure where it's very small embryonic like stem cells. I take 120 cc's of someone's blood, separate it into plasma, activate the quiescent, which are just kind of sleeping stem cells in their blood, separate that out, and then reintroduce it after it's been activated with lasers and cryo. And then I quantize it to specific frequencies with coherent light. Then I can move it to any position on a person's body. And to that end, which sounds a little, strange, but I've been able to eliminate type 1 diabetes in multiple people.
Yes.
And that's, and yeah, I mean, you've talked to at least one of them I know of. And it's by virtue of literally saying, okay, I know the body wants to heal itself. What does it need? And in that case, it just needs beta cells and a thing called the islets of Langerhans and the pancreatic arm. So what do? You put them there, and you do that with light. You actually set up a homing beacon and you move the stem cells into that position in the body with light. And then over the next 3 days, they differentiate and become beta cells, and then the person starts pumping out insulin, and they're good to go. And that's the kind of stuff. It's kind of on the forefront, but those are the things that I see all the time is for diseases where you're told, and this is one of my pet peeves when somebody's like, there is no cure. We're doing a trial for congestive heart failure with the same procedure where we use it on the heart. And, we had one person who had a thing called a milrinone pump, which is where they put a PICC line in your arm and they drop it into the top of the vena cava in the heart. And they put a pump on your hip and they put this liquid called milrinone, which is a thing called a photodiesterase inhibitor, a PDE4 inhibitor, and it makes your heart fire harder. And they tell you up front, like, you're not going to live as long, you're going to die sooner. But hey, you'll be able to make it through the day. But you have congestive heart failure, so sorry, nothing we can do for you. I'm honestly not so cool with that because I think human ingenuity is a really great thing. Like if you think through a puzzle, if you're really working on it, you'll figure it out. And so with one of those patients, we took their ejection fraction from 21% to 36%, got them off of the milrinone pump, got them off of the Eliquis, and their cardiologist was completely flummoxed because typically congestive heart failure is just that, it's heart failure, it's moving downhill. They very rarely see it rolling back up into a position where their heart is healthy. And this particular person went from almost blacking out walking to their mailbox to building a house, working 8 hours a day doing
Such a
physical labor.
big deal. That's such a big deal. And that's what I'm learning. Again, other than pregnancy, I've been healthy my whole life, never been sick longer than 7 days. And so I never understood when you're sick, to find these solutions changes your whole life, changes every single moment of your day, changes your focus, your attention. And like we said, if you can heal yourself, then you can actually focus on helping others. And so I appreciate all these cool things you're saying. There's always a solution.
Yeah, and one of the things is the way this grows and the way that we kind of overtake just the ridiculousness of the current system is just by trust and word of mouth, where one person who's had an experience talks to another person, and I do this all the time. I talk to people and say, "Hey, what's cool? What have you heard of? What's new?" And it's always the people that I know that are trusted, that a lot of scientists, a lot of doctors, because everybody bumps into new cool tech, and there are a ton of people that genuinely want to help and want to heal and are doing it for the right reasons. And I think if you can create a network of that, which is kind of what you have here, well, that's what it's all about, right? It's setting up a ripple, and the pond goes into, the stone goes into the pond, and the ripple propagates out. And that's what this is. It's
Okay.
us propagating a ripple. So to that end, actually, we probably ought to jump on questions because I see that there are a litany of questions.
All right, Gabby, there are slides with the questions. We're going to start with some of those. Um, Monique wants to know how to heal diabetes. We've only have a little bit of time left, Ian, so you got a rapid fire.
Cool. Type 2 diabetes. There's a book by Jason Fung, Fung. He's a nephrologist in Canada, and he's got a really good book about doing intermittent fasting, alternate day fasting, and complete water fasting. The whole crux of Jason's clinic is primarily to knock out people with a lot of conditions, a big part of that being diabetes. So if it's type 2, do that, knock it out, you're good. Type 1, call me. That's probably it. Or move to China. They've got a similar thing they've been doing over there. There's a group in Canada who came up with a process, but that one I'm not too thrilled about, so I don't really promote it or recommend it, because basically they figured out how to modify someone's genetics and put cells into the pancreas. But the way they did it, it requires you to be on tissue rejection drugs for the remainder of your life. And if you don't do the injection of the tissue rejection meds, then you die. And that's so you're trading insulin for anti-rejection meds, which hey, you're still a customer, so which is I think, unfortunately, maybe the rationale behind that.
So I
All
love
right.
that. Thank you for that one. And the one we missed was how to heal from cancer. So I'd love you to just share quickly what you've told me to do, quickly why I've gone through a
Sure.
lot of cellular stuff, but why does it work? And then my big question to him was today, I said, Ian, this cancer, everybody says just keeps coming back. And that's one of the biggest reasons I don't want to do the radiation or the chemo is it kills everything. It does work, but it kills all your good stuff. And if you have a cancer that keeps coming back, your body's so weak the next time, that's when you die. And I'm like,
Yeah.
so go ahead and tell them what you've told me and what
Yeah.
it is one it doesn't work for. Go ahead and say that caveat.
So, okay, so the basic idea is the first thing you want to do is take away the fuel source, right? So that's typically sugars. So you put people in a ketogenic state. Now, sometimes it's a detox issue, and a lot of people actually have really good results from doing like the Gerson protocol, where they'll go hardcore vegan and do juicing. I am not really a huge fan of that, because if your cancer happens to be something that has really built up because of a detox issue, you might actually get great effects from that. But if it's not, you're providing that type of cancer with a lot of fuel. And if you have glioblastoma or pancreatic cancer and you do that protocol, you'll die. There might be a couple of exceptions, like with glioblastoma, which is a type of brain tumor. If you read the literature, it says 5% of the people recover, and that's it. Actually, turns out, because I know one of the people on the national board, that's because they have basically a biological mechanism that knocks it out. So those people, even though it expressed, they were never going to really get that dinged up by it. But in general, if you eat sugars, bad for cancer because the cancer likes it. So that's the first thing you knock out. The cancer's secondary pathway for nutrients is to go after amino acids. The primary amino acid is glutamine, and so you have to do kind of a blockade on that. There's a thing called DONS, DONS. If anybody wants to look up some research from Boston College, Tom Seyfried over there, and you can do it with DONS, which is 6-diazo-5-L-norleucine, which is this compound that inhibits glutamine uptake in the body. Does it very well, in my opinion, a little too well, because if you get the dosing wrong, patient dies. So the other way you can do that is you can block it with curcumin and green tea extract. And I have yet to see somebody who died with green powder under their nose from a green tea overdose. So I'm I'm kind of partial to thinking if you can do it the organic way as opposed to having to go with the biochemical mechanism. If it does the same thing, and it does, just run that way. And then the third thing is you've got to worry about fats. But in the system I put together, I actually used a fat that's been modulated to deliver the nanoparticles, so that kind of buffers that. So really, the first thing is diet, because that's the thing you can control the most. Then you have to have a mechanism to inhibit the transcription in the cancer cells. That's serum. And then beyond that, you'll want to do some other things to upregulate your natural killer cells. And that's when you start looking at interventions like stem cells and things like that. Because if you address, typically I'd address the thymus and the adrenals in the brain and upregulate your natural killer cells when you do that. What's up, Jeremy?
Hi. I've been listening the whole time.
Ah, right on. Good to see you, man.
All right, so I'm on the therapeutic ketogenic diet with really strict macros. Those macros are 2 grams of carbs a day, and the goal is that some people just do fasting, but instead this is like you're allowed to eat a little bit, but you're starving the crap out of the thing that feeds the cancer.
Yeah, and it's a bitch. Admittedly, that diet is a bear.
So
And the reason
hard.
it is, the upshot is it's just a couple of months, and then you go about your business. And the other thing is, biologically, one of the problems with chemo, for me at least, is that it takes the approach of I'm going to beat the cell function down and hope these cells die before you die. And I went a slightly different direction with the assignment. My thought was, since cancer can only exist in this kind of narrow band between -10 and -50 millivolts, if I can bump up the cellular voltage potential, people will have more energy and feel stronger, and the cells will automatically start to regulate. And at the end of it, when you're done, your body's stronger. So the next time, if it tries to come back, it's not going to be able to. And the reality is, like in your case, Britnie, specifically in your case, when you know that you have a type of cancer that's recurrent, really what you need to do is you have to isolate, why did this present in the first place? And once you understand why it presented, then you can kind of mitigate whatever that was. But most people never do that. They never take the time. And usually after chemo and radiation, they're so beaten down that they're just doing the best they can to try and survive. And so the other approach is, at the end of it, you're fit, you've lost weight, you're stronger, you have better energy, your mental clarity goes up, and you don't have as much pain across your body. It also has the kind of the peripheral benefit of knocking out most autoimmune issues while you're doing it, and that doesn't suck. And that's just because of the kind of the mechanisms that really promote autoimmune response. You kind of take those out on the periphery as you're dealing with that. So if you've got some autoimmune condition when you start, you likely won't when you end up.
Everybody asks me, how are you feeling? How are you feeling? I'm like, honestly, like $1,000,000. I feel like $1,000,000. This is the most I've cleaned out my system. I'm like in ketosis. I'm exercising. I'm sleeping. I've got no 5 hour in my life, which I do miss, but I have a lot of good supplements that are giving me energy. And it's really, it's only been, like I said, 6 weeks-ish, but I do feel better than I felt in years, except for when this tumor has been pushing on my nerves, which did not feel good. But that, like I said, is going away. So I appreciate that. All right, that's the cancer one. I think we should I know we want to go through all these, but let's ask a couple questions from the chat. We've got a question from Jessica. Jessica,
We have
pop
a
up.
lot of people asking about ivermectin.
Yes.
Oh,
And
so
carbendazole.
yeah, ivermectin and fenbendazole both are really good. If you're not doing my protocol, I would thoroughly recommend people doing those. I think they're actually really good. Fenben's a little bit more aggressive because you have to hit kind of a static threshold where you're actually going to experience a little bit of bleeding and it's uncomfortable. Ivermectin, honestly, everybody should do a parasite cleanse of some sort.
Yes.
Antiparasitics rock; they're great.
Okay, just a second on
I
that. What brand do you recommend? Anti-parasitic?
Yeah, Cellcore. Yeah, that's usually what I send to people and do myself. Is Cellcore makes a really really good anti-parasite cleanse. Or you can just go to Tractor Supply Company and buy a big tube of ivermectin.
I don't
And
know how you take it or how you're supposed to do it.
well, so with that, you actually just squeeze out a certain amount and you put it in your mouth and you take it that way.
Okay.
Yeah. Now, there's a couple of others that you can do as an oral liquid. Same effect. Parasite cleanses in general are great. I thoroughly recommend them. If you're doing my particular thing, it's kind of unnecessary, but I'll check you for parasitic loading beforehand, because a lot of times one of the big issues for people that have most ailments is parasitic load and viral load. And if those two things are high, you actually have to eliminate that first, or not eliminate. You have to marginalize it. You've got to get it back into a bracket where you can actually contend with it.
Love it. All right. And so there's like another one that's membendazole.
That's the prescription version that is for people, as opposed to fenbendazole, which is for animals.
Yes, yes. Okay, great. What's our next question? Our next question.
Are we running with this one? In your journey as a scientist and a healer, what's the one truth about human potential for healing and longevity that you wish everyone understood?
Do that one, or we're waiting on the next one.
That's a great one, actually. So the one thing that I would recommend, know that you can live incredibly long and incredibly well, but at some point you're still going to die. And this is, and I don't mean that to sound horribly nihilistic. But there's one of my friends who's a professor, Dave Sinclair, and we've talked about this stuff before. And he's kind of the opinion that you can genetically reprogram yourself over and over and over. And I don't actually think that's the case, because I have seen plenty of bodies in a morgue that don't have any structural impediments, and for all intents and purposes, they're perfectly healthy, and yet they're dead as a hammer. Because I actually think that the body is more of a vessel for a person's learning and evolution as a creature and a soul than it is like a permanent fixture. And so when your time is up, your time is up, and you're going to bounce out. Despite how great kindergarten is, you probably wouldn't want to stay in kindergarten forever.
Oh, snap. He's getting deep. Oh,
Yeah.
my gosh. Awesome. Mark, pop on and ask your question. Mark Howell. Thank you, Ian. This is so good. Thank you for staying on.
Fasting playing a role, like the cancer cells feed off sugars and then kind of starving it out that way. What's your opinion of carnivore kind of playing into that? Because I've been experimenting with that, and it's a very, very low sugar diet.
So it jives. That's actually a great approach. The only problem is there's this thing called the gluconeogenic threshold. And carnivore diets are awesome because they really clean your body out. You feel great because you're detoxing a bunch of the muck that's in everybody's system. The issue is cancer, being a very old mechanism, doesn't just pull energy from one primary fuel source. And what happens is you hit this thing called the gluconeogenic threshold, where your body will take protein and it will actually convert protein into sugars, and then the cancer will use that as fuel. So you can ask Britnie, you've got to keep your protein below a certain threshold so you don't hit that point. If you hit that point, you may as well just be sucking down donuts.
Yeah, so the hardest thing for me, Mark, is I'm used to eating like a bodybuilder. I eat my weight in grams of protein a day, and one of the macros for me is 35 grams of protein, 2 grams of carbs, and 75 fats. Now, again, that's based on my body weight and stuff. And so it's been really hard. It's not very much food, but the low protein piece, just because I specifically have cancer, is way lower than I would do when I'm just being a normal, healthy person that wants to build muscle.
Yeah, in general, Mark, I think that diet is great because it cleans people out. I don't think long term it's perfect, because what happens is you're going to end up decreasing the mucosal lining in your gut, and that's going to cause damage over time unless you're an Inuit. If you're an Inuit, hey, all good. You're wired to be able to do that. Go have some blubber and enjoy the carnivore diet. But if you're not an Inuit, you're probably going to need to roll in some vegetables at some point so that you can keep the mucosal lining of your gut and stay in check without having leaky gut.
Love it. Thank you.
Can we have Kalina come on and ask a question? Because a lot of people are saying they want to hear the answer to this Kalina's question.
Selena, I'd love you to come on and explain post-cancer. Does that mean post-chemo? Does that mean post?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I had stage 3 small cell ovarian cancer when I was 22. I had heavy chemo and radiation for about 3 years straight. And I have a lot of post-cancer effects, depleted immune system, and just I'm working with an integrative medicine doctor that's looking at a lot of stuff, and it's getting better. But the damage that the heavy doses of chemo and radiation did on me at 22, it's 17 years now, cancer free, but it's still, they don't really talk about when you're going through cancer, how damaging what they're doing to your body is. And then when you're done with chemo and radiation, the doctors aren't really like, this is what you should expect. It's kind of like, well, the cancer's gone, go home, have a good life.
Yeah, I think one of the telltale things there is when the people who are treating you get behind lead shields before they treat you, or put on gloves with the stuff they're asking you to ingest, you should typically have pause. If it's so toxic that you have to put on chemical gloves before you give it to somebody and you're expecting them to eat it, you should maybe watch out for that. In your case, pretty much, again, this goes back to the very first thing we talked about, is what does it mean to be in good health? And anybody, and I mean that in the sense of any body, is capable of being regenerated. It's just a matter of how you approach it. If you want, feel free. Just I'm happy to point you in the direction of some things. You can get my contact information and reach out. I try and help everybody as best I can. There are lots of us who are trying to share info, but there are a bunch of things that I'd actually tell you that would probably help and bolster your system. But if you want, reach out afterwards, give me the specifics, and I will give you my best assessment of who to talk to, what to do, and where to go. Happily. And that applies to all of you guys. I'm genuinely here to help. And if I can do it, I'll do it, and I'll tell you where to go. And if I don't know, I'll tell you I don't know.
You are the kindest. And Kalina's one of our heroes, so we need her to be in tip-top shape for our mission. So I appreciate you very much. And Kalina, we love you. Thank you for sharing that. Oh my gosh, so good. I know we've got more questions. I'm going to get through one thing really quick. And then I think as long as you have, Ian, if you have a little bit more time, we can keep going through questions. But this is a book recommendation. Give us a summary on why you're recommending this book. It's not one you wrote. I realized I actually had it in my library of downloads. I just haven't listened to it yet.
Yeah, single best book I've ever read. And I think the reason for that is, one, I speak the same language as Hawkins, so it was easy for me to digest. But what I'd actually recommend is, rather than read it, reading's great, but listen to it. Go on Audible and listen to it. You probably want to put it on like 1.3 or 1.4x because he was in his 80s when he dictated it. And so you might want to claw your ears off because it's at a slightly slower pace. But if you put it on 1.3 or 1.4, it's great. So, and the reason I say that is there's kind of, the whole book is about the evolution of human consciousness. And one of the things that happens when you're a guy like this, and Hawkins was a super sharp guy, but more importantly, he was a very enlightened sort of guy, and his consciousness was very strong, very clean, very clear, and he helped a lot of people. And everything he did was in an effort to help more and more people. Initially he started out as a doctor, and then he became, a scientist, and then he became a healer. And all of that progression was trying to become more and more and more effective at helping people in suffering. And for me, that's insanely relatable. But the reason I say that to listen to it is when you're moving along that path, after he outlines this thing amidst all of the rest of the book, he outlines a thing, kind of a scale of consciousness in human awareness. And there are certain threshold points on there. And when you move beyond certain thresholds, as he did, and he wouldn't say this about himself, but I feel pretty comfortable saying it, your voice becomes coherent, your thought becomes coherent, your gaze becomes coherent. All of the energy coming off of you, much like the difference between a light bulb and a laser. And since I do, laser optics and work with lasers all the time, the difference, you can have the same number of photons pumping out, little particles pumping out of light. But if you have an old school light bulb that's incandescent, the light's coming out diffuse in all different directions. It'll warm a hot dog. If you have light coming out of a laser with the same number of emissive photons, it'll punch a hole through steel. And it's all because of coherence. And what happens is, as your consciousness evolves, you become more coherent as a form. And in the case of someone who's already coherent, when you hear them speak, it resonates, and you can actually feel and perceive the resonance, which is why people love listening to Hawkins, and why I'd say it's better to listen than to read. Great book to have as a reference book, but it's a beautiful book, and it really does help frame your perceptions about other people. Because when you meet people, if they're in a bad spot, you don't generally think about why they're in a bad spot. If they're in a great spot, you don't generally think about it. You think about it in a frame of references at how it relates to you typically. And this kind of opens up the floodgates a little bit, because it helps you think about things in the frame of reference of them.
I
So
love that. All right, guys, we're going to keep rolling here. And again, maybe I'll have time to answer 2 more questions. This is the company. I asked them, we thank you for coming on here for free and gifting my mastermind with all this intel. He's amazing.
truly happy to help.
Yeah, you're the best. So Inhale Water is his water. Wizard Science.
Wizard Sciences.
So
yeah, and the kind of the nod there is, there's an old sci-fi writer named Arthur C. Clarke who wrote a book called 2001: A Space Odyssey and a bunch of other stuff. And he also holds a patent for the first geosynchronous satellite. Really sharp guy. And he said one time, any sufficiently advanced technology will appear indistinguishable from magic. And so I very often get, in fact, just in the past hour, had someone say, well, that's it. It was regarding Alzheimer's. And they said, that's it? That's all you have to do? And I said, yeah, that's it. Doesn't have to be fancy.
God.
Simple works.
That's what's so frustrating. So many amazing breakthroughs can have such simple solutions. And I'm just believing and praying and hoping that we can continue to get your stuff out there. So guys, really quick.
Hey, Britnie, can I say something real fast?
Yeah, let me get through this one real quick, really quick. We were so excited talking today, and I was like, I've already had 4 people message me and say, how can I meet this guy? And I said, well,
Hi.
inviting him out to the island to come out to teach some stuff. And we're actually talking about some heal protocols together. And they said, well, will you do a retreat that we can learn from him and start trying these practices? So guys, we don't have a price. We just barely picked dates as this was turning on, but we have outlined heal retreat. We've got one in February. We'll hopefully pick another date in the year. But for those who want to come sit at his feet and hang out and have custom food made for you and do somatic breath work or holotropic breath work and really just start elevating your healing to the next level, we'll have his stuff there. He'll be doing some treatments. We're going to map it all out. But if you're even interested, again, we don't have all the details put together yet, but if you're interested, just let us know. And 25 people can come out and hang out with you for 4 or 5 days. So
that would be awesome. Yeah. And actually, I will say, if we're going to do that, my partner, Steven, he's an orthopedic surgeon in Miami, which is the clinic you guys were at, Stephen Alex. And so I would imagine we'll probably have a laser. We'll probably have, all the stuff. And I'll bring lots of cool things for people to see and experience.
Awesome.
That sounds awesome. That's beautiful, by the way.
Thank you. Yeah, I haven't shown him all of the island yet, guys. I've shown him a little bit and said, this is what God's put in my heart. But I'm ready to take the whole island to the next level of just really letting people heal. And our goal is to make it accessible. Like, how do you learn these things and then you can do them at home without it costing you hundreds of thousands of dollars? Even looking at these other facilities, they have so many crazy things, but it's not attainable for people. And I know what just my personal experience with Ian has been, how do I help as many people as humanly possible? So we're trying to make a mecca out of the island for new
Beautiful.
ways of learning how to heal yourself. So people can go home and share those. So I'm very, very excited. Amazing. And we'll go through more of that in a little bit. Jeremy, what was your question, babe?
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, there we go.
So sorry about that. Bear
All
jumped on. Gabby, he's been touching your frame picture saying, Gabby, Gabby.
Hi, Bear.
But Bear wasn't on me a second ago, but I just wanted to say, just thank you for everything, man. Like, you've been so generous with my wife and so generous with me as well. Like, I got a chance to meet up with them at the clinic out here, is I believe his partner's clinic here in Miami. And I have a traumatic brain injury, and this laser he's talking about, he ran me through a protocol using my own stuff in my body, right? Like my own what is it, T cells in my body?
T cells.
Yeah, it ran me through that with this laser, and 48 hours later, my energy I'm feeling really, really good. So I can attest to it, and I've tried everything. Those of you who know me, I've been all over the world doing all sorts of stuff. So doing pretty good. And then I've got a testosterone regimen that I just got my levels, so I'm about to start it, and then hopefully we can start doing some of this stuff using our body's own power to heal ourselves, just making our bodies remember how to do it. And he's the guy that's doing that.
That genuinely makes me super happy. Like, that's beautiful.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Ian, do you have any more time for maybe one question?
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, anybody got another question? I know we've been on here for a long time, but it's just this stuff needs to be shared, and he's not really on social media. So go ahead. What's our next question? Should I go back some, Gabby, or Elena? Congratulations, my dear.
Thank you. I just had grandbaby number 7 yesterday. So my question is, what about just keeping up with the basics? We don't currently have any like active, terrible, catastrophic kind of disease processes going on, but we're getting closer to middle age, and we just want to do better than what we've been doing and want to improve where we're going, so that way we don't have any of these catastrophic diagnoses or events hit the road. So what's a good, where should we start?
Okay, so the two things I would recommend, one is just something that everybody can do on their own, which would be to take 1 day a week and just not eat, or intermittent fast. That's literally, it's such a simple thing. Where I used to teach, one of the other professors, he would fast every Monday. And I asked him about it one time and said, why do you do that? And he said, yeah, because I understand the biological mechanisms. Like, I've done this long enough to realize that we are not designed as creatures that are supposed to eat 3 meals a day, 7 days a week. That's not how we evolved. And that's totally true. So the first thing is just back away from the kitchen. Please stand back from the fork. That's the first one. And you can do it like even just an intermittent fast, where it's not like something that's completely painful and egregious. You can just do 16 hours where you don't eat, and then 8 hours where you do eat, and do that a couple days a week. That's one. And then the other one is, for me, and this is something I do every day, one of the things that I developed was the one that extended the lifespan of those mice so long. And that's it's on my site, and it's called Olympics. That's the other thing I do. And I actually take a lot of it because I push myself a little bit too hard, I think. But I know I'm taking hits, so I compensate where I can. But that's a great thing. It's like a super broad spectrum anti-inflammatory. It knocks down the cytokine levels across your body, but at the same time, it upregulates all of your mitochondrial potential, and you feel it. And there are so many athletes that are, names you guys would 100% know, that are on it all the time, because it changes intracellular dynamics, and literally you can be the same size you are, but literally twice as strong as you appear to be. And that's not an exaggeration. I mean, that's a very literal thing. You can double your strength without changing your mass. And the reason for that is your brain actually downregulates your muscular firing capacity to about 25 to 30% of what it actually is. And you can mechanistically manipulate that a little bit so that it bumps it up to the 40, 50% range. And when you do that, you are literally much stronger than you would be. So same weight, a lot more strength, or just access to the strength. What I always tell those guys though is on that stuff, because it's kind of like Captain America serum, the trick is if you can, as I told an NFL quarterback, like if you can throw 60 yards, now you can throw 100 yards. Don't. Because your muscles adapt to things very rapidly. And though your muscularity can handle it, you can't get all of the chondrocytic stuff, which are all your cartilaginous things, the tendons and ligaments. They don't have the same degree of blood flow. And so you have to work up to it. You actually can do things like infrared light and a PIMF mat to stimulate the blood flow in those regions. And then you can basically be sort of superhuman. But before that, for the average person, if you just do that, you will have so much more energy and strength. It's like the lights come back on biologically. And also, and I've had this happen a few times with women specifically who were already in menopause, they called me and said, "Hey, I've started having a menstrual cycle again."
Oh,
And I
no.
said, that's terrific.
Oh,
You know, like
benefit of menopause.
yeah. So you get it, right? Like I didn't get it at first. Like they called and they said, "I'm having a menstrual cycle again." I said, "That's terrific. That means you're biologically younger and your body's realized that. So it's kicked back on." And they were like, "No, no, 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 no. Not terrific." They said, "Well, what can I do to take this stuff and not have that happen?" I said, "You can't. I'm sorry, because it's going to biologically roll the clock back and give you more energy. And if your body says you're fertile again, well, sorry, you're fertile." And yeah, and that was, they actually stopped taking the product, and that's happened multiple times. Because
I don't want to be younger. This is Aunt Flo's the worst. All right, Yulia is amazing, and she's got her hand up. Yulia, what you got, darling?
Hi, Ian. Thank you so much. Such an amazing. I'll have to rewatch again. It's just so powerful. First question is, you mentioned fasting, but I have heard that for women, it's not necessarily good to fast because of the hormones. I've also heard another story where you're supposed to fast during specific cycles of the period where your body is stronger and things like that. What would you say about that?
I would say that's true. Actually, guys are designed so that we can go out and run along the Serengeti with no food for a couple of days, kill something, bring it back, and eat it. Women are not designed that way biologically. So yeah, it's better for you guys to do more of an intermittent fast. And I would say that yeah, you should look at the timing of it, but an intermittent fast would definitively be better for a woman. And there are actually a lot of problems if women's blood sugar changes far more rapidly than men's blood sugar. So yeah, it can throw you off kilter. So intermittent fasting, great. Figure out what your timeline is, figure out what your cycling is, because I work with so many diabetics, I literally have Dexcoms on my phone, and I'll look at people's blood sugar all day actually, and you can kind of see them waving up and down. So you get a sense of like when a person's blood sugar is higher, when it's lower, depending on when they're eating, how much they're exercising, what their stress load is. So like if you want to be really granular about it, get a Dexcom, just pop it on your arm, or any other CGM, a continuous glucose monitor. Just pop a CGM on your arm, look at your levels, chart how you feel, and that'll tell you exactly when it's good for you to do a fast. Or more to the point, do an intermittent fast, because I do actually think that's better for women.
And how long of an intermittent fasting is better for women, and during which time of the cycle would you recommend?
I would actually say, okay, from your, let's say you're on a 28 day cycle, right? So I would say at about literally from the point at which your period ends, if you go about to the 1.5 to 2 week mark beyond that, that's probably going to be when you want to kick it in. If you're just doing it then, I would actually say you'd be better off, as opposed to hitting something really hard one time. You're far better off if you do more of a mild intermittent fast. Biological systems don't respond terribly well to just jarring, shocking changes. But they do incredibly well if you just kind of progressively move things on. So if you did, say, a 12-12 fast where you just stop eating at 8 o'clock at night and you don't touch anything until 8 o'clock the next morning, that'd be kind of your entry point. If you go a little bit more extreme and you do like an 8-16 fast where you're eating for an 8-hour window, so you start eating at 10 a.m., you stop eating at 6 p.m., and then the rest of the time, nothing other than water passes your lips, you're golden. And the reason I say nothing other than water, and this is kind of an unfortunate thing, but when people say like, oh, I'm doing a water and I have coffee and tea, your body's actually kind of amazing in that when something has a skewed pH and it's not right around 7.2, it can actually pull energy from tea, which is going to be a little more alkaline, or coffee, which is going to be a little more acidic. But both of those are actually more skewed to the acidic side, but one more than the other. But your body can actually take that proton gradient and pull energy from it. So if you really want to be like diehard, water, just stick with the water. And don't do alkaline water. Just go for a normal balanced pH. And the reason for that is your body is a very balanced energetic system. And you can think of it like a battery. And so if you bump in a bunch of alkaline water, your body's going to mitigate that shift. Because if your blood pH skews more than about 0.2 of a point, you're dead. And your body is really, really good at keeping you within a very narrow margin of error on your blood pH. And so if you drink a ton of alkaline water, it's just got to work harder to balance that out. Just water is pretty good the way it was made. Just run with it at its natural pH. It's ironic that I'm saying that given that I, have been developing different types, but those are literally for therapeutic purposes, right? Like the average bear, just drink some good water. If you've got some condition that you're trying to negate, then this stuff is fantastic. But in general, I would just do that. Do like a, do a 16-8 fast about the middle of your cycle if that's the only place you're going to do it. Otherwise, I'd say do a 16-8, maybe 2-3 days a week. You will actually feel a difference.
Wow. Okay, thank you. Yeah, I really appreciate it. And
sure.
In my type of work, I deal a lot with. I'm a coach. I'm a mindset coach, but I deal with a lot with energy and frequencies and things like that. And today I mentioned you were talking a lot about the waves and the frequencies and energy, and it's just amazing to see how for us to think about our bodies, not necessarily the mass, but more about the waves and energy. And is there a way for us to think about our health in terms of waves and energy and frequency, and how can we help the healing?
Yeah, actually, so the that video that I had referenced earlier, where the guy had a histamine reaction to shellfish, that is literally waveforms. Because the only thing I did was change the waves. So when your body is the way it's supposed to be, it's harmonious, it's balanced, and it's oscillating the right way. Right, you're in harmony with what your intended blueprint is. When it's got some sort of discord happening, then you're out of kilter. And I will say, I have yet, out of all of the time that I've been doing this and all of the people that I've met, I have yet to meet a single person where their ailment does not have some sort of emotional component. If it's some sort of disease, the disease always has an emotional component. At least that's been my experience thus far. Not to say that I won't get new data and that will change, but I have yet to see it. So I would say it's the harmony inherent in the body is in fact really what's going on. And if you're more harmonious, you're in good health. If you're disharmonious, you're in bad health. The upside to that is I do think that we're getting closer and closer to the point where we're going to be able to put people back into harmony with their own form without doing it through the mechanisms that we used to use to do it. I think we'll require less and less surgery, less and less chemo, or less and less pharmaceuticals. And it just, as we, need a lot fewer of those sorts of things, I think people's health can rebound with literally light, photobiomodulation. Look up, any work on PBM. That's really great. Good resource. Fellow over at Harvard, Mike Hamblin. Mike's a boss at that stuff. He's really sharp. You can look at some of the older work on photobiomodulation. You can look up Pulse Centers is a company. They sell PIMF chairs. When I regenerated my my leg, that's what I used. I used a Pulse Centers coil. Really good stuff, and there's tons of papers on that too. Yeah, it's all at the crux of it. I actually think all of this is about being in health via vibration. It's just how do you vibrate it, right? Do you vibrate something with a chemical, or do you vibrate it with an electric wave?
Yeah, that's spectacular. Thank you so much, Ian. I appreciate it.
Oh, my pleasure.
I love it. And that's it. You said, like, how can we help people get back into alignment? And I don't have the answer just yet, but that's like that's what I'm feeling we're going to do on the island as phase 2. So beautiful, amazing. I see there's a lot more questions and we really want to get to them all, but we're out of time. If you want to spend more time with Ian, we're going to be on the island together, which will be so fun. Beginning of the year. We hope you guys sign up for that. And for those who need that direct contact information, obviously, I'm going to.
Yeah, thank you all for being here.
If you registered for this call, we will send you the recording so you can go back through it with your notes. And we're just so grateful again, Ian. Thank you so much. You're the best.
Happy to do it.
All right, guys. And with that, go and may the force for good be with you all. See you next month.
Bye, guys.